Know the difference with Annex Wealth Management? You know, we work with a wide variety of clients, including people who have built businesses through blood, sweat, and tears, long hours and sacrifices. But through passion and perseverance, they've constructed some pretty impressive examples of American ingenuity. Now, one of the downsides is much of their wealth is tied up in things like property and physical assets. And because there's so much invested in the business, their net worth might be high, but the bank account doesn't reflect that. So what do you do about that? For this conversation, let's pull in a member of the Annex Wealth Management private client team, Brian Lamborne. Brian is a senior wealth strategist, an attorney, and has a master's in law and taxation. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, let's start on a positive. What are the upsides of being asset rich?
The upside in the end is that you have the asset and it is valuable. Long term, it is something you can hopefully monetize. In the short term, it does create problems, though.
Okay, let's talk about those problems. What are the downsides?
Well, the downside is a lot of times you have the asset, but you don't have maybe an income stream from it. Going to a couple of examples you just mentioned, having it tied up, for example, in real estate, that can be problematic. If you have a whole bunch of properties, for example, something we run into every once in a while is we'll have a client who has a whole bunch of residential rental properties. I mean, those are all worth a lot of money, but the income streams that come off of them may not be supporting a lifestyle. That's problematic in itself is, okay, we have these things that are valuable long-term, but in the short term, they're not producing what we might need. The other part is you're very concentrated in a particular market, so there's no diversification. So if something happens, let's look at 2008, for example, the market crashes, all those assets that you had in real estate have now fallen off a cliff, and that's problematic on the other side as well.
Let's talk about what we do for those clients who would like to unlock cash from those assets without losing ownership.
So when we talk about not losing ownership, there's really only one way we can do that. And we can use those assets as collateral. Otherwise, we have to sell stuff off, which means you don't own it anymore. What we can do is work with them to see if there's a spot where we can use it as collateral to take out a loan. Now, keep in mind, now you have a loan, which is creating a separate issue. But it does mean you can monetize some of this by using these assets as collateral and enabling yourself to soften some of the issues.
There comes a point when maybe somebody wants to unwind what they have. Is that something that we assist those clients with?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's actually something we can definitely help with. The biggest part when you're doing this type of planning is to establish your goals. What are you trying to do? After that, then it becomes a process of, okay, let's analyze this, see what options you have, and then turning around and seeing what we can do to help facilitate that. You know, I'll use the real estate example. We can take a look at all the properties and say, okay, which one of these are performing properly? Which one of these are maybe not? And maybe we can sell some of these off to create some cash flow. There are things we can do. Like I said, we establish it. Do you want this long-term or do you need cash flow now? And once we've established that, we can analyze the scenarios.
Brian Lamborne is a senior wealth strategist at Annex Wealth Management, part of the Annex Wealth Management private client group. Talking about asset rich but cash poor, you start unloading some of these things. You've got some tax and estate planning strategies that need to come into place. What do we do there?
Most people want to soften the blow of taxes. And so there are things you can do. For example, if you're a business owner, and this is something I talked in the context of real estate, but business owners, a lot of times their wealth is locked up in the value of their business. They may, have a $10 million business, but it's not cash flowing the way they need for their lifestyle. So we can take a look at things like using qualified small business stock if they qualify. If you're in the real estate realm, we can take a look at 1031 exchanges or like-kind exchanges and maybe defer some of that and also at the same time reduce some of the current taxes. There are things as well like tax loss harvesting. So for example, we could look at selling capital gains assets that are at a loss to offset the gains that you might have from selling real estate or your business.
If those clients are then to the point where they want to retire, we can take over and help them craft a plan.
Correct. This is all part of a process. If you have these assets, this is a lifetime process. So it's something you look at regularly to say, maybe we want to liquidate some of this. Maybe we can transfer this to the kids. Going back to, you mentioned estate planning, maybe we can start looking at transferring to the kids, doing things like that to manage some of this stuff in the long term as far as estate planning, but also while creating a stream of income. For example, let's sell the business to the kids. That might be one way to loosen some of the restraints that you have by having this asset.
It's really encouraging that there are options.
A lot of times you don't know that the options are there until you talk to somebody about it, somebody who does this stuff for a living. There are ways to take advantage of planning opportunities, whether that's estate planning opportunities, whether that's things built in the tax code like qualified small business stock 1031. So working with somebody who knows the ins and outs of these things is a good way to make sure you take advantage of those things.
And folks, we do those kinds of things, and we can help. Brian Lamborne, Senior Wealth Strategist, Annex Wealth Management, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.